she was going to introduce you to the Mampoer. So I'll read you one of Bosman's Mampoer stories.
Okay.
Waar's Ammie?
Ons het net tee gedrink toe gaan sy.
Okay. The berries of the karreeboom, oom Skalkhoven said, nodding his head in the direction of a tall tree, whose shadows was creeping towards the edge of the stoep. Okay, we're not on the stoep now, but it's, yeah, we get it. May not make the best kind of Mampoer that there is. What I mean is that Karee brandy is not as potent as the brandy you distill from Moepels or Marulas. Even peach brandy, they say, can make you forget the rust in the corn quicker than the Mampoer you make from Karee berries. But Karee Mampoer is white and soft to look at, and the smoke that comes from it when you pull the cork out of the bottle is pale and rises up in slow curves. And in time of drought, when you have been standing at the borehole all day, pumping water for the cattle, so that by the evening, water has got a bitter taste for you, then it is very soothing to sit on the front stoop, like now, and to get somebody to pull the cork out of a bottle of this kind of Mampoer. Your hands will be sore and stiff from the pump handle, so that if you try and pull it out yourself, the cork will seem as deep down in the bottle as the water is in the borehole. Many years ago, when I was a young man, and I sat here on the front stoop, and I saw that white smoke floating away slowly and gracefully from the mouth of the bottle, and with a far-off fragrance, I used to think that the smoke looked like a young girl walking veiled under the stars. And now that I have grown old, and I look at that white smoke, I imagine that it is a young girl walking under the stars, and still veiled. I've never found out who she is. Hans Kriel and I were in the same party that had gone from this section of the Mariku to Zeerust for the Nagmaal. And it was a few evenings after our arrival, when we were on a visit to Chris Wilman's house on the outskirts of the town, that I learned something of the first half of Hans Kriel's love story. That half at which I laughed. The knowledge of the second half came a little later, and I didn't laugh then. We were sitting on Christian Wilman's stoep and looking out in the direction of Sefton's Neck. In the setting sun, the koppies were red on the one side, and on the other side the shadows were lengthening rapidly over the vlakte. Christian Wilman had already poured out the Mampoer, and the glasses were going around. That big shadow there is rushing through the thorn trees just like a black elephant, Adrian Becker said. In a few minutes' time it will be at Groot Mariku station. The shorter the days are, the longer the shadows get, Frikkie Marais said. I learned that at school. There are also lucky and unlucky shadows. You are talking about ghosts now, and not shadows, Adrian Becker interrupted him learnedly. Ghosts are all the same length, I think, more or less. No, it's the ghost stories that are all the same length, Christian Wilman said. The kind you tell. It was good mampoer, made from career berries that were plucked when they were still green and full of thick sap, just before they had begun to whiten. And we said things that contained much wisdom. It was like the shadow of a flower on her left cheek, I heard Hans Kriel say. And immediately I sat up to listen, for I could guess of what it was that he was talking. Is it on the lower part of her cheek? I asked. 2 small purple marks? Because in that case I would know for sure that he was talking about the new waitress at the Zeerust Cafe. I had seen her only once through the plate glass window, and because I had liked her looks, I had gone up to the counter and asked her for a roll of Boer tobacco, which she said they didn't stock. When she said they didn't stock kudu biltong either, I had felt too embarrassed to ask for anything else. Only afterwards I remembered that I could have gone in and sat down and ordered a cup of coffee and some harde biscuit. But it was too late then, and by that time I felt she could see that I came from this part of the Mariku, even though I was wearing my hat well back on my head. Did you speak to her? I asked Hans Kriel after a while. Yes, he said. I went in and asked her for a roll of Boer tobacco. But she said they didn't sell tobacco by the roll, or kudu biltong either. She said this last with a sort of a sneer. I thought it was funny, seeing that I hadn't asked her for kudu biltong. So I sat down in front of a little table and ordered some harde biscuit and a cup of coffee. She brought me a number of little dry flat cakes with letters on them that I couldn't read very well. Her name is Marie Rousseau. You must have said quite a lot to her to have found out her name, I said, with something in my voice that must have made Hans Kriel suspicious. How do you know who I'm talking about? He demanded suddenly. Oh, never mind, I answered. Let's ask Christian Wilman to refill our glasses. I winked at the others and we all laughed, because by that time Hans Kriel was sitting half sideways on the Rimpies bench, with his shoulders drawn up very high, and his whole body seemed to be kept up by only one elbow. It wasn't long after that he moved his elbow, so that we had to pick him up from the floor and carry him into the voorkamer, where we laid him in a corner on some leopard skins. But before that, he had spoken more about Marie Rousseau, the new waitress in the cafe. He said he had passed by and had seen her through the plate glass window, and there had been a vase of purple flowers on the counter, and he had noticed those 2 marks on her cheek. And those marks had looked very pretty to him, like 2 small shadows from those purple flowers. She is very beautiful, Hans Kriel said. Her eyes have got deep things in them, like those dark pools behind Apjata's kop. And when she smiled at me once, by mistake I think, I felt as though my heart was rushing over the vlaktes, like that shadow we saw in the sunset. You must be careful of those dark pools behind Apjata's kop, I warned him. We know those pools have got witches in them. I felt it was a pity that we had to carry him inside shortly afterwards, for the Mampoer had begun to make Hans Kriel talk rather well. As it happened, Hans Kriel was not the only one that night who encountered difficulties with Rimpie's bench. Several more of us were carried inside. And when I look back on that nagmaal, my most vivid memories are not of what the predikant said at the church service, or of Christian Wilman's Mampoer even, but of how very round the black spots were on the yellow, pale leopard skin. They were so round that every time I looked at them, they were turning. In the morning, Christian Wilman's wife woke us up and brought us coffee. Hans Kriel and I sat up side by side on the leopard skins. And in between drinking his coffee, Hans Kriel said strange things. He was still talking about Marie Rousseau. Just after dark, I got up from the front stoep and went to see her in the cafe, Hans Kriel said. You may have got up from the front stoep, I answered, but you never got up from those leopard skins. Not from the moment we carried you there. That's the truth. I went to the cafe, Hans Kriel said, ignoring my interruption. And it was very dark. She was there alone. I wanted to find out how she got those marks on her cheek. I think she is very pretty, even without them. But with those marks, Marie Rousseau is the most wild and beautiful thing in the whole world. I suppose her cheek got cut there when she was a child, I suggested. Perhaps when a bottle of her father's Mampoer exploded. No, Hans Kriel replied very earnestly. No, it was something else. I asked her where the marks came from. I asked her there, in the cafe, where we were alone together. And it suddenly seemed as though the whole place was washed with moonlight. There was no counter between us anymore. And there was a strange laughter in her eyes when she brought her face very close to mine. And she said, I know you won't believe me, but that is where the devil kissed me. Satan kissed me there when we were behind our theaterskop. Shall I show you? That was what she said to me, Hans Kriel continued. And I knew then that she was a witch. And that it was a very sinful thing to be in love with a witch. And so I caught her up in my arms and I whispered, trembling all the time, show me. And our heads rose up very tall through the shadows. And everything moved very fast, faster than the shadows moved from our theaterskop in the setting of the sun. And I knew that we were behind our theaterskop, and that our eyes were indeed the dark pools there, with the tall reeds growing on the edges. And then I saw Satan come in between us. And he had hooves and a forked tail, and there were flames coming out of him. And he stooped down and kissed Marie Rousseau on the cheek where those marks were. And she laughed, and her eyes danced with merriment. And I found that it was all the time I who was kissing her. Now, what do you make of this, Skulk? I said, of course, that it was the Mampoer, and that I knew now why I had been sleeping in such discomfort. It wasn't because the spots on the leopard skin were turning like round wheels, but because I had Satan sleeping next to me all night. And I said that this discovery wasn't new either. I had always suspected something like that about him. But I got an idea. And while the others were at breakfast, I went out on the pretext that I had to go and help Marnie Burgers with his oxen at the church square outspan. But instead, I went into the cafe. And because I knew her name was Marie Rousseau, when the waitress came for my order, I could ask her whether she was related to the Rousseaus of Grysmeerbolt. And I could tell her that I was distantly related to that family also. In the daylight, there was about that cafe none of the queerness that Hans Kriel had spoken about. It was all very ordinary. Even those purple flowers were still on the counter. They looked slightly faded. And then, suddenly, while we were talking, I asked her the thing that I was burning to know. That mark on your cheek, Juffrouw, I said. Will you tell me where you got it from? Marie Rousseau brought her face very close to mine, and her eyes were like dark pools with dancing lights in them. I know you won't believe me, she said, but that is where Satan kissed me, when we were at the back of our Pieterskop together. Shall I show you? It was broad daylight. The morning lay yellow on the world, and the sun shone in brightly through the plate glass window. And there were quite a number of people in the street. And yet, as I walked out of the cafe quickly and along the pavement, I was shivering. With one thing and another, I did not come across Hans Kriel again until 3 or 4 days later, when the Nachtmaal was over and we were trekking to the other side of the Dwarsberge once more. We spoke of a number of things, and then, trying to make my voice sound natural, I made mention of Marie Rousseau. That was a queer kind of dream you had, I said. Yes, he answered. It was queer. And did you find out? I asked, again trying to sound casual, about those marks on her cheek. Yes, Hans Kriel answered. I asked Marie, and she told me. She said that when she was a child, a bottle of Mampoer burst in the voorkamer. Her cheek got cut by a splinter of glass. She's an unusual kind of girl, Marie Rousseau. Yes, I agreed, moving away. Oh, yes. But I also thought that there are things about Mampoer that you can't understand very easily.